So we're going to take a look at the midpoint formulas. If our goal is to find the value of a midpoint on a number line or on a coordinate plane, we can use several different formulas, right? So we're going to start off by just talking about on a number line. Okay, if we want to find the coordinates, we're going to use the formula a plus b over 2, which in terms of words, if I were to describe what a plus b over 2 is, I'm going to say really take the average of the coordinates of the endpoints of that line segment. Okay, so again, it's really just the middle of a group, the middle of a set of numbers is the average of those numbers. If you think about tests, if I were to say you got 100 on a test and you got an 80 on a test, if you wanted to know what your average was, you'd get a 90, and that 90 is exactly in the middle of 100 and 80, which were the grades that you got. So when we're talking about midpoints, that's really what we're describing. We're saying what is exactly in the middle of our values. Okay, so if you take a look at our example here, if I give you this line segment AB and I say the coordinates for A and B are -4, and you can see right here is 9, because that's exactly halfway between 8 and 10. If I wanted to know what is the coordinate of the endpoint, I would say let's do -4 plus 9. Those are the coordinates divided by 2. So -4 plus 9 is 5. 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. So they're claiming if we were to go to our graph and we were to go, remember 3 is kind of exactly halfway in between, so if we go in between that, we'd get 2.5. And if you notice, that is halfway in between. If I were to make jumps, I'm making 1 jump, 2 jumps, 3 jumps, and a little bit, right? And here I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing a half, 1 jump, 2 jumps, and then there's the rest of that little piece. Okay, so I am actually making the same number of jumps, right? It's just in little sections. Okay, so the trickier part is, well, what if we want to do this on a coordinate plane that has an x comma y, which there's actually 2 parts to that coordinate, right? And so we have a little bit more work to do. So if I give you a coordinate that looks like this, right, instead of it just being like the number 9, it's 7 comma 5, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it for the x part of the coordinate and for the y part of the coordinate. So our formula for this one is going to look like, okay, average the x's, oops, okay, let me fix that, average the x's by adding up just the x parts. If I were to say this is my x1 and my y1, that's a point, and this is my x2 and my y2, and that's a point, okay, I'm going to say if you average the x values, which for us are the 7 and the 2, okay, and then you also average the y values, okay, oops, can't type today, okay, so if we average the y's by adding them up, okay, that this is the midpoint on a coordinate plane that just has 2 parts to each of its coordinates. So for us, we're going to say that that's going to be the 7 and the 2. Those are my x's. So I'm going to say 7 plus 2 over 2. All right, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the y's. The y's are 5 and -4. So I'm going to say 5 plus -4 over 2. Let me put that in parentheses. Okay, and this is a point, right? This is the x and the y of the midpoint. So this is 9 over 2, which is 4.5, and this is 1 over 2, which is 0.5. So let's go to that point and see if it looks like it's exactly in the middle. First of all, it should be on the line. So if you make any mistakes with your calculations, you might get a point that doesn't even exist on your line segment. That's a big indicator that something happened. But let's make sure that this is on our line and that it appears to be in the middle. So here's 2, 3, 4.5, which would be about right here. And then it says go up to about 0.5, so that'll put us about right here. And if you notice, that is splitting our line, it looks like, into 2 equal parts. So we're going to say that that value right there represents the midpoint, which is just the average of the x's and the average of the y's. Okay, so that's one possibility. The other possibility is maybe they'll tell us what the endpoint is, right? So if we wanted to kind of give a quick graph of what this looks like, I'm not going to be very accurate. So they're kind of saying in this case, we have this point, -2, 1, which would be kind of somewhere right in here, and they call that M. Okay, and then we have one endpoint which is at -5, 7, like up here somewhere, right? And that's C. And they're saying there's another endpoint which would be like way on the other side, like somewhere probably down here, that they're calling D. Right? And they want to know what that one is. Like, what is that exact coordinate? So if I had this line segment that going like this, okay, that M would be the midpoint between C and D, because that's what they say here. We're using the segment CD. So they're saying we know what this one is. That's -5 and 7. And we know what the midpoint is. It's -2 and 1, but we don't know what the other endpoint was. So that's different from the one that we had here where they told us the ends, right? They told us about E and F, and our job was to find the middle. Now we're doing the opposite. We're being told one of the ends and the middle, and our job is to find the other end. So here's the way this one's going to work. Our formula for the midpoint was if you add together the x values, okay, from the two endpoints and divide by 2, you're going to get, and I'm going to use this new notation, x for the midpoint, right? So if you add together the x of one endpoint plus the x of the other endpoint, divide that answer by 2, you should get the x of the midpoint. So let's see what we have here. This is that one of the endpoints. I'm going to call this x1 and y1. And this is the x and the y of the midpoint. So I'm going to call this one xm and ym. Okay? So if I wanted to find out what is the x coordinate of that other endpoint, I'm kind of saying this is the one that I don't know, right? I know one of the endpoints, and I know the answer should be, in our case, this -2. So we're going to actually have to do a little bit of solving here. So let's plug in what we know. I know that the one endpoint should have an x value of -5. Okay. I don't know what the other one is, so I'm just going to call that x. We can call it x2 if we want, but I'm just going to make it simpler. And I know that when I take the average of the endpoints that I should get a -2. Okay? So I have to solve this equation to find out what the endpoint was. It wasn't as simple as just plugging in and simplifying like we did here. I'm going to have to do a little bit of algebra. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 2 and find out that -5 plus x is -4. And then I'm going to add this 5 over and find out that my x has to be 1. Okay, so if you notice, we're not finished. I need to find coordinates, which means I want an x and a y. I know that the x is 1. I don't know what the y is, but the nice thing is I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to say y1 plus y2 over 2. That's going to give me the y midpoint. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say I know that the endpoint is 7. I don't know what the other one is, though. That's the one we have to find. And if I divide those by 2, that I should get the y value for the midpoint, which we know is 1. So if I multiply this out, multiply over here, I'm going to get 7 plus y is 2. And then when I subtract this 5 over, I get what y is -5. So I'm claiming that the other endpoint, D, has an x value of 1. Right, which I'm going to use the D to indicate that that's what that is. Okay, and I'm going to get that as my answer. And if you take a look at my rough sketch here, that's kind of where we ended up. If I go over to 1 and down to -5, that's about where I ended up in my rough sketch. Right, and so my picture is kind of confirming what I just calculated was the endpoint of D. Right, so we should be able to use this formula both ways. Either be given both of the endpoints and calculate the midpoint, which is just plugging into the formula, finding the average of the x's and the average of the y's. And we should also be able to be given a midpoint and be able to calculate one of the endpoints when we know the other one.